Welcome everyone to today's HFS webinar, and we've got some very exciting research that we wanted to share with you today. We coined this term services as software nearly 2 years back now, in 2024, because we saw a fundamental shift in the business model of how services are sold and delivered and how business models are going to change. And what we've been doing over the last 6 months or so is starting to figure out how this services as software model becomes from theory to practice in real life. How do you operationalize this? And my colleague Rohan, who leads our life sciences and healthcare practice, has done some amazing work and taking an example of how this model can come to life in a pharma manufacturing use case. So that's really what we want to share today. So Rohan, let's get going to the next page. So uh, just some housekeeping. All the participants will be muted during the call, but we want to make this interactive. There is a small Q&A button that you can see on the bottom of your screens, hopefully, or at least I see on the bottom of my screen. Please start entering your questions. The one question that we always get is, will we share the deck? The answer is yes. You will. I think we've got over 300 people who registered for this event. So everybody who registered will get the deck. The webinar is also being recorded and will be posted on the HFS webinars page. We want to make this interactive, so please type in your questions and I'll answer all the easy ones and I'll ask all the hard ones to Rohan. But we'll take the questions as we go along, and then we'll also spend some time at the end to really answer as many questions as we can to the best of our ability. So let's go to the next page, Rohan. This is what we want to cover. I'll spend maybe 5 to 10 minutes on really just, hopefully all of you know by now what we mean by services as software, but really talk about why we coined the term, why we see the model shifting, what are the benefits for clients. And then I'll hand it over to Rohan to really talk about operationalizing services as software. And we'll use a pharma manufacturing use case to really talk about how the business model changes. We've also developed a fantastic business case, which I think is very, very attractive, on why you should do this. And then what should be the roadmap and what are the challenges that you should anticipate to make this happen. So let's get going. Finally, before the content, I think there's a ton of research around this topic on our website, especially as it relates to the life sciences industry. We've highlighted 3 or 4 pieces here. Please take a look at them if you want to deep dive on any of the conversation points that we are talking about, and also feel free to ping us. We are more than happy to get on a call or have a discussion on how you can operationalize services as software into reality. So look, I think in today's world, everybody has AI. That is almost ubiquitous. When we reached out to all the large global 2000 enterprises, practically 80% of you have some LLM, whether it's Anthropic or Gemini or OpenAI, whichever one you like, in production. In fact, most of you have a multi-model solution already. On an average, the global 2000 enterprises have 2.5 of these LLMs running in parallel. And you can see some of the market shares, although that's shifting, but we're already starting to see from an enterprise perspective 3 or 4 big players coming in. We do anticipate more open source models to start to come in. So these bars are shifting as we speak. But the point is, everybody has AI. And if we move to the next page, what's also very clear is everybody is deploying agentic AI in some form or fashion. Yes, there are fewer cases in production, but in every one of your organization's nook and corner, I can bet there is some agentic AI stuff, pilot, POC, or in production happening. I hardly have talked to any organization, any enterprise who doesn't have agentic AI in some form or fashion in their organization. Next page. The question, however, is while the investment is universal, we're not realizing the outcomes, and we ask this question to a lot of enterprises on just self-rate your progress on your AI ambitions. Everybody wants to solve for world hunger right now with AI. But if you ask yourself a simple question of, on a scale of 1 to 10, how close are you to achieving your AI ambitions? And we are barely passing. You can see the average score that we are getting is about 4.1. So we are barely even passing the realization of the AI ambition. So the question is, why? And Rohan, if you can build out the page, the number one challenge is not that AI technology is not ready. I think it's getting there. It's improving at a honestly at a ridiculous speed right now. But the number one challenge is your operating model. Unless we start to change the underlying business model itself, just adding AI on top of it is not going to make a huge difference. 2/3 of the enterprises blame their legacy operating model behind this because, frankly, our operating models were created in the early 2000s, 2010. We've tinkered with it. We've added bells and whistles to it, but we've not fundamentally changed how we organize, how we go about doing things. And if you're built in 2010 and you're trying to capture 2026 AI native value, it's obviously going to fail. And so that is the reason why we actually coined the term services as software. Rohan, if you go to the next page, is services as software is not just agentic AI. It's not a technology. It is a fundamental way of rethinking how we look at our business model. And I think there are 5 key dimensions to it. Rohan, just build that out, man. And I think number one is, if you look at our legacy business model, if you look at the legacy services, we've always been using technology, but it's still human-led delivery. And I think services as software shifts it completely, where it's going to be agentic-led or AI or technology-led delivery. The IP and the investments that we were making was largely about headcount. The growth was completely linked to the headcount. You add more people and you can expect more growth, and vice versa. That's also flipping. We are finally in a position where we can see non-linearity coming into our businesses, where a lot of the growth is going to be coming from how do you codify your expertise, how do you codify your context in your business, and how do you build proprietary IP. The investment velocity will have to increase. The gone are the days where we could completely dealing capex and opex. I think those two budgets are converging as we can as we go along, and so the investment velocity is very, very high. And the way that you buy and sell this is also changing. We've always bought services on some kind of an effort model. Whether you buy McKinsey or you buy a TCS or an Accenture or whoever, it was almost always based on some effort or input pricing. And I think that's going to change as well to outcome-based pricing. And the production scalability was again measured in headcount or effort, but now it's going to be measured by how many AI models do you have in production. So it is so when we talk about services as software, it's a change in the business model. It's not just some AI on top of everything, and that's going to be hunky dory and solve all your problems. And if you look at the operating model, then Phil and I and the HFS team, Rohan, if you move to the next page, came up with this approach is fundamentally what's changing is in an effort-based model, in both models, whether it's effort-based or services as software, you will have your systems of records, whether it's SAP or whichever ERP you're using. I think the conversation on agentic AI replacing SAP, etc., are one too premature, and frankly, yes, there'll be some impact, but I don't think that's going away. You need a system of records. You need a basic transaction processing capability at the in your technology architecture. What's changing is what's above that. Right now there is a huge amount of SaaS sprawl on top of your ERPs. I was talking to a large CPG CIO a few weeks back, and he asked me, Saurabh, how many apps do I have? And I said, look, man, if you're asking me, it must be large. And he said, we have 2,000 applications, and those are the ones I can count. And that is not uncommon. Organizations have grown through acquisitions, divestitures, etc., and they've built a whole host of these SaaS applications. And frankly, you know, you don't need all of that. And then the work, all of this is just technology is being an enabler. All the work is done by the people. And as you look at these services as software technology architecture, that's what changes. One, we feel that there is a lot of SaaS sprawl that can be codified into some sort of agentic AI, and there'll be that agentic layer. But the fundamental shift that's happening is the work is being done at the agentic layer. Work is being done by the technology, and the people are there to govern it. People are there to make sure, have a human in the loop. People are make sure they're processing the exceptions. People are there to make the policies. People are there to drive empathy in the business, and that is what is fundamentally shifting. So then the question becomes, what is the operating model? And Rohan, if you go to the next page, I think we've defined 6 layers of the operating model, right from compute to you need a foundation model to you need some agent builder or orchestration. And I think enterprises have done a fantastic job in investing in those first 3 layers. What's missing is the next three, what we call the one office execution, which is where we've been organized in our enterprises as silos. Here's a finance function, here's an accounts payable function, here's a manufacturing division, here's my supply chain, which itself has a number of silos. You cannot realize the value from AI unless you break down these silos, unless you start to reorganize yourself. You will not be able to capture the context in your enterprise if you continue to operate and organize in the same way. And that's what we mean by the one office execution. You need a very strong governance and intelligence layer. And that's why you keep hearing of, the words around AI sovereignty, the words around AI harness. How do you harness this power? You need a governance and intelligence layer. And then perhaps one of the most important ones is the activation layer, number 6, because this is no longer just the role of the IT organization, or this is no longer the role of a business organization. You need an activation layer. And frankly, this is one of the biggest pieces that's missing. Why so many pilots are successful, but hardly anyone scales into production, because somebody needs to take that pilot and activate it within the organization. And unless you have that activation layer, you're not going to realize the business outcomes. And then there is the continuous feedback loop that so this is our theory. This is what we've been seeing. This is what we feel is the operating model. And if we move to the next page, this drives a fantastic business case. Uh, um, but to make it real, let me hand it over to Rohan. Rohan, let's take the theory that I described and bring it to practice and see how does that manifest in let's say a pharma manufacturing space.
Thanks, Saurabh. Let's do that. I want to start at the very beginning. right? Which is, why do we want to do it now? Sure, Saurabh described the operating model, the technology behind it, and some of the business rationale, but I want to take it to the next level of detail. The reason for us wanting to do it now is really about the convergence. The timing is all about convergence, not any one particular breakthrough. There are 6 forces that are beginning to converge at the same time, and that is the real reason that we need to consider this. The 6 reasons being, the volumes are rising as well as the complexity. Revenue is getting trapped by slow releases, tightening regulatory scrutiny across the globe, a shrinking and costly pool of people, whether they're QA folks, whether they're microbiologists, whether there's other forms of subject matter experts. And AI that is finally enterprise grade is sort of, pushing enterprises in that direction. But also, let's not forget the boards have been demanding measurable value for a period of time, and that measurable value is beyond efficiency for its own sake. So any one of these could manage. You could manage around any one of these, but when all of these 6 are beginning to peak together, is what makes this a now decision, not a 2 years from now decision. So there are 4 P's that we need to focus on, and these 4 P's under productivity, prediction, personalization, performance are not 4 random benefits. Productivity gets you started. Prediction changes how the operation actually behaves. Personalization begins to create enterprise-specific intelligence, something that Saurabh alluded to earlier, and performance is where it finally begins to show up in the business. Right? This is where you can get the CFO on your side when it comes to making those investments. But we got to be very careful with productivity because it is a trap. Most AI business cases stop right here, and that's exactly why they tend to underwhelm their leadership as well as the boards. The numbers are real, and I will show you in a bit when I share the business case. But efficiency is all you're trying to sell. You have undersold it. And remember, productivity really is yesterday's game. Prediction fundamentally changes quality, right? And that is the use case that we're going to discuss in a minute. And prediction is really about shifting from reacting to prevention. Today, quality largely explains what already happened. Services software creates the possibility of identifying risk earlier, preventing recurrences, and progressively moving from forensic quality towards anticipatory quality. Personalization is the defensible hill, and the reason this is not a commodity. Two manufacturing plants running the identical model end up with different intelligence because the agent reasons over your SOPs, your batch history, your CAPAs. And a rival can buy the same model, but they still cannot buy your intelligence, right? Intelligence is really what services as software is embedding into the enterprise. But then let's face it, performance is the only P that a CFO is really going to care about. It essentially flips quality from an overhead line item into a lever on their P&L. And it turns pricing from headcount to a positive financial outcome. So really what the 4 Ps from a benefit standpoint is telling us is where the value comes from. But the real question is what actually has to change in the operating model to capture it. So let's get into the real world, right? So this is what's happening, and I'll start at the very beginning of our story. There's a large manufacturer that sells branded therapies and is in the market running a batch of in their manufacturing facility is running a batch of an injectable drug on its sterile filing line. At 2:00 in the morning, during filling, an environmental monitor signal is triggered and a line anomaly raises a concern about sterility assurance. So under the good manufacturing practices, or GMP, this is a deviation and is instantly classified as critical because it involves sterility and therefore patient safety, and therefore blocks the batch release until the deviation is resolved. And what this really means is that the manufacturers and this is something that the manufacturers experience every day. And very little has actually been done to move the needle in terms of either automating it or reducing the number of deviations or even increasing the speed to market. So knowledge work in pharma manufacturing is essentially the analytical problem solving and decision making effort required to turn raw factory data into safe, compliant, and repeatable drug production processes. And notice how little of this process that you're able to see on the screen is genuinely automated end to end. Every stage creates another human handoff and another opportunity for delay. The operator manually documents the event, and the shift supervisor reviews and signs the batch record section before it's sent to quality. A deviation is opened in the quality management system like a Viva Vault or a TrackWise or whatever that manufacturers are using. And then QA classifies it as critical and the batch is quarantined. Then the human relay begins with the QA investigator manually reviewing historical deviations, SOPs, and batch data across their MES, across their LIMS, across a typically partially integrated ERP. And such manual reconciliations and data integrity gaps across the system leads to a variety of delays, right? The result is a process designed around human effort rather than the release velocity, which is really the enterprise goal. That is the CFO's goal in order to improve cash flow. So in this context, it is not the manufacturing equipment that keeps the batch quarantined, but rather the knowledge work that does. Consequently, the end-to-end release of a sterile product typically takes 25 to 40 days against 15 to 20-day target, their own target. And each failure investigation costs them around $14,000. And that's mostly in senior personal time and potentially millions in lost revenues. Quality activities already consume about 30% of a typical site's headcount, and at a branded sterile site, this work is currently overwhelmingly insourced. And a single deviation can touch up to 12 plus people across 5 or more functions. And this is by far the highest cost and most unstructured work in manufacturing. All right, let's see. Okay. So the measurements follow a lagging approach with KPIs such as deviation rates, repeat deviation rates, right first time round, on-time release, review cycle times, and so on. And really, good is defined as less than one deviation per batch. One deviation per batch is still about 12 to 15 people being used, $14,000 being lost in trying to fix it, and so on. And a repeat under 10%, and 95% of those reviews closed within 30 days means that quarantined drugs of up to 30 days is reducing cash flow by at least 30 days. This is the kind of expert intensive and repetitive work that we believe that services software is designed to solve. So let's go see how services software can do that, right? Now look at what changes when the machine takes on the knowledge work. An agentic layer is sitting on a validated by both GAMP as well as 21 CFR Part 11 data substrata that unifies MES, LIMS, QMS, and ERP, and detects and classifies deviations the moment an environmental signal is triggered, and a line anomaly is triggered with line anomalies, requiring no manual logging or reconciliation. An investigation immediately begins. The agent, the AI agent here, not a human agent, retrieves all comparable historical deviations, whether they're kappas, root cause analysis, SOPs from a ground knowledge graph, then drafts the appropriate RCA and proposes a kappa with the highest historical success rate for this specific failure mode. In parallel, the agent previews the executed batch record end-to-end, auto-populates fields, and surfaces only genuine discrepancies. Humans remain absolutely critical, but they move from doing the work to governing decisions and exceptions. The microbiology SMEs, the qualified person, the QAs that review the agent's work at defined exception gates to make the release decisions with a complete audit trail rather than assembling the regulated environment. The validated data substrata and audit trails are what makes this viable in a regulated environment. The work might seem boring, but when you think about the outcomes, they are significant. Deviation closure is under 10 days from over a month. 50% of QA capacity is released, 50%. and sterile release occurs in about 36 hours versus 25 days. So we're talking about hours versus days. Faster release means revenue recognized sooner and working capital freed. In an environment that we are approaching higher interest rates, working capital being freed has extensive value to any CFO. Every batch makes the own intelligence more valuable. Enterprise intelligence is becoming more actionable across the value chain instead of hidden in silos. And then measurement is really done in real time, right? One of the key things about services software is live telemetry dashboards, which in this case is continuously showing the deviation status, cycle time, right first time, and value realized. These are metrics that matter. And most importantly, notice the commercial implication. Once software increasingly owns the work, we can move from paying for people to paying for outcomes. The deviations closed, batches released, right first time performance, speed of revenue recognitions are all the metrics that matter, and that is what you tend to pay for versus having to pay for people. So let's talk about the business case, right? Yes, the work is hard, and probably it will be hard in the initial stages as you begin to implement services software. But I want to talk about why that is worth the while. The argument is more powerful because it's not merely an efficiency business case, but a revenue generation business case. Remember what I spoke about earlier. This is about taking product faster to market, which is really about revenue generation, not just about efficiency. The economics are front-loaded, a heavy one-time build, and then very low marginal cost, so that the return depends on pushing enough volume and reuse through it. Our base case requires only about 1.8 million in startup investment, and it pays back inside the first year once it is live. The value comes from three places, right? And it is important to note that the value or the ROI is diversified across multiple line items. Right? So the first one is lower cost to resolve. Every deviation investigation consumes quality assurance and subject matter experts, hours across drafting, rework, and review. That effort grows linearly, almost 1-for-1 with volume. So more deviation simply means more work. That is where most manufacturers are today. With services software, AI agents draft the investigation, perform root cause analysis, propose corrective and preventive actions or CAPAs, and review the batch record in advance. That same work gets done with a fraction of human effort and far less rework. So the cost to resolve each deviation falls sharply and stops climbing with volume. And that can, over a 12-month period, return almost $5 million on a $1.8 million investment. The second value comes from prevention. Right? This is about leveraging enterprise intelligence and ensuring that deviations don't occur in the first place. This is the benefit that makes services software better than plain rules-based automation that most manufacturers have at this point in time. Every investigation that SaaS runs is fed into a guard knowledge base, so recurring failure modes are recognized much, much earlier and are designed out rather than rediscovered from scratch each single time. Over time, the repeat deviation rate falls, which means that fewer investigations to run, fewer batches are at risk, and less firefighting for any manufacturing quality team. And lastly, is the speed to revenue. Deviations and batch records sit directly on the critical path to release. So when services software closes them out in days rather than weeks, the product reaches the market sooner and less cash sits in quarantine and in process inventory. And we recognize that these are illustrative examples, illustrative numbers that we're sharing with you to give you a sense of the potential. And these illustrative figures are for a single site with a single service line in a sovereign hosting, and they hold up because every driver is transparent and can be pressure tested in here. Right? So I'll make the case that a services software for a single service line in a manufacturing facility when it comes to knowledge work can generate a 10x return in a 3-year period. That's the total, right? Where we actually get to see the returns begin to show up in about 3 to 4 months during the startup phase. All right. So obviously, easier said than done, right? So we recognize that the economics are extremely attractive. And obviously the question is well, why? Why isn't everybody already doing it? Because it's not easy. And anyone who says it's easy is probably not done it. We think we've identified 3 real barriers. And I want to acknowledge that those are the ones that must be addressed. There are probably more barriers, but these are the ones that we think should be prioritized and addressed as you begin to consider executing services as software. So let's consider trust. The trust barrier are probably the biggest in terms of validating a probabilistic learning system under GMP, cleaning up fragmented data, and defining who is accountable when an agent gets it wrong, especially in regulated AI, especially in regulated industry. Regulated AI must be explainable, auditable, reproducible, and validated. Right? Secondly is the viability of the economics. The economic barriers, beyond the financial case that I shared just a minute ago, are the fixed cost build and the shift to outcome-based financials that neither the procurement organization, the financial organization, or even the legal organization are set up. Most of these are legacy oriented, which means that they're still biased towards paying for people versus outcomes. And lastly is the organizational change management. The organizational barrier that includes the people, the roles that change, the potential for tribal knowledge to walk out the door. And if the floor does not adopt it, right, the whole thing will crap out. So it is important that services as software should not be treated as just another AI implementation, because it is not. It is simultaneously a technology, it's an operating model, it's a commercial paradigm, and it's a governance and workforce transformation. While it might all seem extremely hard, really hard actually, the reason to push through it all are the returns. Not a lot of things that you can do inside an enterprise and generate 10x returns at this point in time. The business case is really strong, and we think that business case is strong enough that clearing these barriers is worth the effort for now and into the future. And honestly, this is really the only way to maximize the potential of AI and moving beyond the use of LLMs into doing something that's much more durable. So how do we do it? There are 5 steps to enabling services software, and this is deliberately not a big bang effort. We've broken it up into 5 discrete steps designed in a way that each one returns value and reduces the risk to the next. So let's start with the step 1, which is essentially to diagnose and quantify. You start by making the invisible cost of knowledge work visible, mapping the deviations, reviewing review and release the process from an end-to-end standpoint and baselining the cycle time sooner. Understand the cost, the effort, and the quantity and the quality. From that, you have the opportunity to pick one high-valued beachhead startup as your use case and build a hard business case around it. And I want to argue that we've kind of done one of them already for you, made your job a little easier to get going. Because at the end of the day, you cannot price or automate work you've never measured in the first place. So really, the first step is to ensuring that your baseline is solid, that you understand what you're doing, and that your use case is one that will actually generate real-time benefits to the enterprise and make the case that it is worth scaling up. Step 2 is about designing the services as software operating model. Right? Saurabh alluded to this earlier, and I made the case as well, that services software is not a technology implementation. It also is about reimagining your operating model. This is an opportunity for you to redesign the work for outcomes instead of activities. And this is a big shift. Right? It is about defining the outcomes and SLAs, the agentic workflow and the exception gates where humans will still stay in control. Right? Again, we're acknowledging the fact that we're operating in a regulated industry. And until the regulators are fully on board in terms of AI led versus AI augmented, we're always going to need humans to stay in control here. And that is what services software is accommodating for. This is also where you choose the commercial model, the financial model, which is shifting from paying for people and the seats to paying for the outcomes if the work is outsourced. Even if the work is insourced, it is a trigger to begin to align incentives and even compensation to the type of work that is the future versus the type of the work that was in the past. Right? So it is critical to begin to use this opportunity to redesign the operating model because it begins to form the foundation for the efficacy and the value of services as software as we go forward. Step 3 is to build that services as software foundation. This is really where the heavy lift begins to happen. This is where you need to unify the data across your MES, your LIMS, your QMS and ERPs into a validated substrata and codify your expertise. It was part of the tech stack that Saurabh showed earlier. And codifying that expertise into a governed knowledge graph and reusable IP. That is the key. You then begin to stand up the agentic layer for detection, for investigation, for understanding the root cause, creating and proposing CAPAs, and review under industry standards like GMP and regulations such as the 21 CFR Part 11, which is critical. Because it is this trustworthy data and own IP, not just the model, that will get you to the next stage and ensure that there is continued trust and durability in terms of services software as the way that you're enabling work. Step 4, right? So we've done all of the hard work at this point in time. We've diagnosed and set a baseline. We have designed the operating model. We have built the services software foundation, and now it's time to let the rubber hit the road, which is to deploy, which is to adopt it, and then to begin to have the ability to scale it. Launching the beachhead with agents running in shadow mode alongside people in QA reviewing by exception is critical, right? By no means are we suggesting that this should be a hard cut. The recommendation is to doing this in parallel to existing processes or existing systems to prove the value before any sort of a hard cut over. And I think that is critical to ensuring that there's a valid A/B test that occurs in real time. And so once those results hold within an agreed threshold, you drive adoption through change management and training, and then scale the validated pattern across multiple service lines, across multiple sites, across multiple products, as well as potentially adjacent processes as well. Our last step is to measure, right? As the old adage goes, there's no value in doing anything if you are unable to measure it. So measurement is going to happen by running real-time telemetry, and the ability to leverage real-time telemetry is one of the biggest benefits that services as software brings to bear. And this telemetry will help with tracking deviations, the cycle times, the right first time metrics, capacity, and realized value so that benefits are visible and auditable to finance. In so many ways, the CFO then becomes the primary stakeholder and the primary audience for something like this. So all of these metrics need to, one, resonate and align with the needs of the CFO's office, but also drives a level of transparency that telemetry brings to bear so that the finance organization is able to see this anytime, all the time, and in real time. Every case then feeds into the knowledge graph. So performance keeps improving and the value compounds instead of plateauing. So these are the key 5 steps that we think are practical, incorporate not only the best practice from a manufacturing standpoint, but are also aligned from a regulatory standpoint, so that not only do they deliver for the enterprise, but they also ensure that that the CFO's organization is completely in the know about all of the changes that are happening and in real time. So let's think about one last thing, the timeline, right? So I guess it is normal to imagine that something like this could take forever. But we think that realistically, this is a 12 to an 18-month journey. The timeline that we have crafted shows that many of the phases overlap, and we think that they need to overlap on purpose rather than running one after the other. And what you'll see is that in the first 3 months, the stand-up is a funded startup beachhead service line with a hard baseline and an approved target that we've spoken about so far. But also, as I just indicated in the 5 steps that in terms of the implementation, we do certainly recommend that services software is run in a shadow mode, and so that the financial outcomes can be compared to sort of the traditional approach that manufacturers tend to take. And I'll sort of repeat myself by saying that there is no better validation than an A/B test in this kind of a scenario. The crux of the entire implementation is really in the middle. It's roughly months 2 to 9 that really need to watch out for. This is where you build the validated data and the IP and move agents into production with QA reviewing by exception. But when I say QA, I'm talking about a human QA that is reviewing reviewing the deviations by exception, not as a part of their core processes. The milestones that matter to the CFO, again, we keep going back to the CFO because at the end of the day, this is about revenue generation. Services software is about meeting enterprise financial goals, and the technology just enables making that happen as the paradigm begins to shift. And so the milestone that really matters to the CFO lands around months 8 to 12, right? Even though retrospectively, you will see that the financial gains are beginning to be seen by month 3, month 4. From a CFO standpoint, where it needs to be auditable, you will begin to see that those outcomes are much more visible between months 8 and 12, so within the first year. When those outcome-based financials go live and finance begins to really trust the value, sees the value and trust the dashboard and the telemetry that is feeding into it. So by about months 10 through 18, right, which is really the very end, you now have a governed multi-process portfolio and a redeployed workforce. And that exact metrics is how you drive confidence into other service lines as well as the enterprise leadership in terms of wanting to scale, right? So this is how we believe that services software can be implemented in a regulated industry. Right? So that said, we are happy to take any questions. I don't know, Saurabh, if you're seeing any questions come through.
Actually, too many, Rohan. First of all, that was excellent. Thanks for sharing this. Maybe we should stop sharing the deck and just have a conversation.
Yep.
But there are lots of questions, and I've been trying to answer several of them to the best of my ability. But I think here's the first one that's I feel is very important. So if the business case is so good, Rohan, that you shared, why aren't more organizations jumping onto this bandwagon? Why are we still, a little hesitant?
Let me answer that in 2 ways, Saurabh. In fact, from a HFS standpoint, we are sitting on a couple of thousands generative AI as well as agentic AI use cases that we know are being implemented in the marketplace. What I will say is that in non-regulated industries, we are beginning to see these being implemented in bits and pieces. They're not coming together as yet. I'd also argue that enterprises are still in the early stages and therefore are not comfortable exposing the full value proposition to the market as yet. But I would argue that they are happening in small bits and pieces. I think with regulated industries in general, they tend to be a little slower when it comes to embracing new technologies, new paradigms, right? And even when they do it in a greater level of secrecy. And even when they do that, they're doing it in some level of collaboration with regulators. So I think the process that they tend to embrace is a little different than non-regulated industries. But overall, I think the argument that we can make is that it is happening. It's happening in bits and pieces, and maybe it is not quite being identified as services as software, even though the attributes of services as software are being embraced.
Yeah. No, Rohan, I completely agree. I just add a couple of points to that. One, to the point on bits and pieces, if you take, the steps that you outlined, we've now collected over 2000 odd use cases and case studies of generative AI and agentic AI, and several of them are in pharma and manufacturing. Uh, and you'll see that there are individual use cases in each of those five areas, so that they exist. The question is, are those being stitched together? And I think that's the next phase. And I think the second thing from my perspective is it's still being looked at as a technology intervention
Mm.
versus a business model change. And I think if there's one takeaway that I'd like the audience to take away from our conversation, Rohan, is that what we are talking about is not just, yes, technology and AI is a very, very important aspect of it, without which you cannot really make this thing happen. But ultimately, what enterprise leaders will have to do is start thinking and rethinking their business models. Because I think if you look at all your five steps and all the stuff that I was presenting, it's a business model change, not a technology feature and functionality conversation. And I think that's the hard part. Um, so, Rohan, so many questions. This one is a good question. In the new world of services as software, how do you see the OEM and reseller partnerships, the reseller business model shaping up? Because you mentioned IP is a very important aspect on your slide. Is there value being a reseller, or should it be pivoted into building some kind of a different proposition?
Uh, my immediate reaction is that those the role of OEMs and service providers is not will continue to exist. They should exist. However, the way they execute should change. Invariably, OEMs and service providers are have a supplier mindset, and what I mean by that is enterprises say, "I need this," and they say, "How much do you need?" I think services or software is probably going to force all of these stakeholders to come together and figure out what are the outcomes that need to be achieved and how do they go about doing that together in under the aegis of services or software. And that has the direct connection to the commercial model that we both alluded to. That is how the financial model will actually come to bear. So that's kind of how I would think about it. I do certainly believe that they both have a role, and that role has to change a little bit to maximize the impact and value of services software.
No, I agree. And I think if I can be blunt, I think if your value proposition as a reseller is just a pass through,
Mhm.
uh, then I think that model is up for disruption. In general, across the economy, we are seeing middlemen. If your value proposition is just I'm a middleman and I'll help you pass through, uh, access is very easy. You can talk to anybody in today's world. It's no longer hard. Uh, so I think to your point, if you're not owning some outcomes, then it'll be a struggle to
And sort of just to pull that thread, you and I are working on an engagement where the enterprise is actively considering a joint go-to-market with their suppliers. So even that entire paradigm is, I think, at a disruptive inflection point in time. So this can go in so many different directions.
Yeah. Uh, so here's another question, Rohan. Any thoughts on how enterprises can accelerate discovery to identify where the value pools really lie? And how do you advise clients when the point of departure is not baselined correctly? That's a good question.
It is. It's a good question. It's a hard question, because you said this earlier. This is not about technology. This is really change management. And in so many ways, I think we've seen elements of this movie play out 10, 15, 20 years ago. And the best analogy that I keep going back to is the ERP implementations in the early 2000s. Enterprises embraced ERPs, but did not fundamentally re-engineered their business processes. They just wanted to do the same thing, and they customized ERPs to the very end. And there are some significant statistics out there about 30, 40, 50% of the ERPs implementations failing because of this. I think we're back there. Enterprises really need to reimagine what their business processes should look like. And even before they do that, I certainly think that they need to reconsider what does success look like for them. If I was a pharma who is selling into the US Medicare market, and thanks to the Infrastructure Reduction Act, I know that the Medicare is going to has already begun to renegotiate my prices. And my top line is coming down. The general decline of public health funding in the US makes margins also begin to shrink. So I've got my market is beginning to shift entirely. And therefore, I think this is that disruptive inflection point that I referred to earlier, is for pharma leadership to begin to question what does value look like for me in the next 3 to 5 years, and then begin to reimagine their operating model, their business processes, the metrics that they need to focus on, and then you begin to layer services as software on top of that to execute. That's kind of how I would think about it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think what has happened is when we think of value creation, we think of silos. We think of, hey, I'm in finance, so let me see what value I can create in finance. Oh, I'm in payables, let me create value in payables. Oh, I'm in pharma, in manufacturing, let me see how can I increase my throughput. Where value, and I think over the last 30 years, every enterprise has done a lot to optimize their processes within those silos. Where a lot of value is getting missed is at the intersections of, say, supply chain and manufacturing, or finance and procurement, or, IT and business. And I think if you have to fast track that discovery process, you have to look at those harder pieces, which are
Yeah.
not owned by anybody, but are owned by multiple people. And how do you bring those people together and start to look at, because without that, you can't change the business model. And without that, you don't know what the value looks like, Rohan, as,
Indeed.
as, as, you were talking about. But you started to mention leadership, and there's a question around that, which is, I have experienced that leaders at manufacturing lines are deterrents of such operating models. We have to influence the CXO level, and that's fine. But how do you motivate the lower org leaders as they fear job loss?
Yeah, I think that is a industry agnostic problem that needs to be solved for, right? Governments around the world, governments in the US, enterprises around the world, enterprises in the US are now beginning to explore how do they do that. But I really think that, and I think we've seen some data points in the recent past, Saurabh, I think you've seen them too, is uh, with the with in the last 2 years or so, with AI becoming the predominant technology that is being embraced, we've actually created more jobs, not lost jobs. And I think it is fair for leadership to begin to sort of talk about the potential of um, of I guess a new form of innovation coming through using historical analogies, right? Every single industrial revolution led to more jobs, not less jobs. And
Yeah.
so we need to find a way, or rather, leadership needs to find a way to start well, not quite discounting, but um, re-educating the potential and the possibilities of AI, which does not include job losses. They would probably include uh, job modifications and the change in terms of the roles and the outcomes of those roles, not essentially the elimination of those jobs. That's kind of if I were to run an enterprise, that's kind of would be my go-to position.
I 100% agree. And that's why, if your business case for using AI or services as software is only focused on productivity,
Yeah,
uh, then I think people will be fearful of it, right? Because productivity means job losses. And if my company's whole mandate is AI will drive productivity or efficiency, and I'll be like, why the hell should I be a part of this mandate? Because my job is at risk. And that's
exactly.
where, we are recommending, and Rohan, I think touched on it, is the 4P framework, of yes, productivity should be a part of it. You need to do things faster and cheaper, but you need to come up with a balanced scorecard of those 4Ps or whatever framework you like. I think Rohan, you said it was performance, productivity, prediction, and personalization. And if, for example, take personalization, if if your narrative around services as software or AI is around it will improve employee experience, it will improve CX, you will find everybody embracing it, right? Why look, everybody is embracing it on Sundays, right? We are all
Hmm.
using ChatGPT to create our recipes and to create our travel itineraries. But then on Monday, we are fearful of it and we are struggling with SharePoint, right? And I think at some point of time, and that fear comes from job losses. So I think it's a great question, but I think the answer lies in one, to Rohan's point, there will be that Jevons paradox, right? Wherein, as something starts to scale up, there'll be more job creation. We don't know where that'll happen yet, but there will generally be more job creation. So that's the macro view. But on the micro view, I strongly feel that we are creating our business cases all wrong by just hyper focused on productivity and efficiency. We are not looking at how AI is driving competitive advantage or, all those 4Ps. And if you start to do that, then if you're creating value, if there's an equity story, and your stocks and your shareholder value is increasing, employees will be in it, right? Because they will gain from it. So look, I think there are a lot of questions. There are at least 15 or more questions, Rohan, that I don't think we can answer. So you and I will have a busy afternoon today answering those. But thank you, everyone. Rohan, thank you for sharing your insights. I think this was excellent. It was one of the most real, practical, hopefully, webinars that we've done. And thanks, everyone, for joining us and listening to us. Hopefully, there were some good takeaways from you. Thank you.